Chair, the meeting's now live.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Board of Police Commissioners meeting for July 10th, 2023. I want to acknowledge that Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So call this meeting to order, and we'll go right into approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
So Chair Kent, the clerk's office does not have any additions or deletions for this meeting.
And we just have, after this meeting, we'll go straight into, after this presentation with any questions or clarification and a motion, we'll go straight into the remaining of this agenda is in camera.
That is correct, Chair.
Yeah, so no additions or deletions. Can I have a motion to approve this agenda?
I move the agenda as presented.
Seconded by Jenny.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Motion's carried. Okay, so declaration of conflict of interest. Anything today? Hearing none, we'll move forward to consideration of deferred business. This is item 4.1, and it's the policing transformation study recommendation. We're going to have a presentation by Bill Moore, the Executive Director of Community Safety. And I believe, Bill, you have some other folks with you, and I'll let you introduce them for the record.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Board. With me today from PricewaterhouseCoopers is Bronwyn Burke and also Josh Oviatt. I'll allow them to introduce themselves as part of the presentation, but I'll just be doing just a short introduction. Just go to the next slide, please. So just to set the stage, in April of 2021, Regional Council approved a motion to move forward with the study. In April of 2022, after the RFP process, PwC was awarded that contract to do the work. And it was at that time that I came on board as the project lead. And then in April of this year, 2023, the report was brought back to council and presented to council. As a result of the council meeting, can you next slide, please? Actually, I'll wait for PwC to go through the report, then I'll come back to the recommendations. Or on a slide that's a little farther in there. So at this point, I'll turn it over to both Bronwyn and Josh to provide the presentation, and then we can return back to the recommendations.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here and to present this report. I saw many of your faces about a month ago, I think, when we were together. So it's good to be back virtually. My name is Bronwyn Burke, and I'm a partner at PwC, and I was the engagement partner on this particular initiative, working closely with Bill and my colleague Josh over, I think, almost a year, but we did table the report in the fall. Before I begin, I want to say on behalf of PwC, I'd like to thank council and the Board of Police Commissioners for their involvement. We had the opportunity to meet with HRP, RCMP, and various community organizations throughout the engagement, which we found to be informative and interesting, and ultimately landed in the report. If we move to the next slide. So with you today is not Tara. She is imminently, I think, giving birth to a baby over the next couple of weeks, but you do have myself and Josh here to present, and Josh will do the bulk of the speaking and did much of the writing for the report. But I'll take us through the next slide and then hand it over to Josh, who is the engagement manager throughout. As Bill said, about a year ago, a little more than that now, I think we were engaged to conduct a study to assess the current dual policing model in HRM and to put forward recommendations for a future model. The focus of the recommendations was to improve the quality and effectiveness of police services, standards, and delivery, and to integrate policing more effectively into the broader community safety and well-being ecosystem. In the report, there's 3 discrete sections. We did an analysis of the current dual policing model in HRM and the total costs of policing today. We provided recommendation for the most appropriate future model of policing in HRM, aligned with the identified values, which we extracted from a visioning session with various community organizations and other stakeholders, and a roadmap to transform from the current model to the future model. What we learned, so the current policing model, and I think what I said in council when I presented a couple of months ago, is that it was, they were merged. The 2 policing systems were merged, but they operated as 2 distinct and independent police services. So little to no integration or coordination between the 2 services. We learned they have their own distinct and independent operating models, which obviously creates challenges in terms of citizen service delivery and community engagement in terms of different delivery methods and approaches. The leadership is disconnected and doesn't provide a consistent operational strategy. So very much focused on independent and discrete leadership of the 2 separate services. They didn't offer services in the same way or have the same standard operating procedures, which citizens raised as a challenge in terms of talking to RCMP or talking to police about similar community engagement, for instance, and getting different responses. The integration between the 2 organizations was never strong, but it was observed that it had been that it had deteriorated in recent years, and there was little to no coordination of resources and limited interoperability. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see what I've alluded to in some of my narrative around the challenges and significant impacts from a service delivery perspective for the citizens of HRM. So community members experiencing inconsistent services and service levels, depending on who was attending to the call or where they may be in HRM. Integration and partnerships were duplicated, and collaborative service delivery had to be adapted twice. Actions taken in response to community feedback weren't cascaded between the 2 organizations. So, which, you know, I reside in Halifax, so understanding that the jurisdictional boundaries are sometimes quite close quarters, and HRM has changed significantly in the past couple of decades in terms of urbanization. The lack of coordination and limited interoperability leads to redundancy and risk in operations. Redundancy being that, you know, I think there was some conversation throughout around optimizing resources, especially in the current climate of, you know, limited resources, and how do we optimize operations so that we're as streamlined and integrated as possible. And then inconsistent governance and accountability structures negatively impacting community-centric services. With that, so that's sort of the landscape of what we learned through significant document review and engagement with various stakeholders at the front end. Josh will now take us through more specifically what the stakeholders said, and then what we learned through the visioning exercise and the rest of the report.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Just one more note. I think there is a perception that's held within HRM that the current model is an integrated operating model between the 2 police services. I think what came through clearly in our current state analysis and was supported by the stakeholder engagement, which I'll talk about in a moment, is that that perception is not accurate. HRP and RCMP do not operate in an integrated policing model today, two distinct operating models. Just wanted to highlight that for a point of emphasis. If we can move to the next slide, please. A core part of our approach and really a foundation for us in understanding both where the current policing model is today and where the community would like it to go in the future was the stakeholder engagement that we were able to do. Understanding the voices of the community members and different groups involved in the policing model today was a critical part of the work that we did. We were able to engage fairly broadly with 18 different organizations across HRM, including HRP and RCMP, different community service providers, the HRM administration, HRM Council, and the Department of Justice, among others. We were also able to conduct a number of interviews and received a number of written submissions. What these written submissions really painted was a pretty clear gap between where HRM is today and where the community would like it to be in terms of its policing model. And this was fairly unique in terms of just that discrepancy between what the community members articulated as what they would like to see in that policing model and where the current policing model is today. There are always gaps, there are always some differences, but the stark contrast in that regard within HRM was unique. That was not, it was more extensive and more strongly felt at the community and individual level than we have seen in other jurisdictions. And some of the key messages that were articulated to us are outlined on the slide here, but the first and foremost is transformational change is required. And so this isn't really about tweaking around the edges and changing a little bit of operations here and there. This is really, from the community members' point of view, about fundamentally rethinking community safety and the community safety ecosystem and how it interacts within HRM. Stakeholders were clear that services need to be redefined and how those services are delivered need to be transformed. And so many indicated that the need to build capacity and capabilities to respond to the community and by the community as a part of the policing model was essential. Alongside the desire to have community be present as partnerships within that policing model, the opportunity to provide meaningful feedback, the opportunity to be true partners in decision making and priority setting, and in providing services where appropriate was articulated clearly. And lastly, one comment that rang through almost universally was, it's not really about who is providing those services. It's about how those services are provided and not about the uniform. So these different elements, we took that feedback into consideration as we developed future recommendations alongside the challenges and the gaps that were identified in that current state analysis that Bronwyn spoke to earlier. If we can move to the next slide, please. So what came through our analysis is that really at the heart of it, an integrated policing model or a coherent policing model in HRM is essential for the path forward. The presence of the dual model and the two different ways of working and the disintegration between police services and the community creates a major barrier that must be addressed. And so there are some key requirements for developing that consistent and cohesive operating model. The approach to community safety needs to be transformed to improve outcomes regardless of model. So no matter what HRM does in terms of a single model or a dual model or an integrated model, there is a need to transform the community safety approach to better align with community expectations. And adopting the single model alone won't drive the improvements that are necessary. Implementing a single operating model is critical, but further transformation and evolution of the policing model and integration within the community safety ecosystem is essential. Understanding that the path forward relies on a single operating model, there were structurally two paths that HRM can take moving forward. Either developing and building an integrated model, which is what was recommended, or a transition to a single agency model. The recommendation that we put forward within our report was to move towards a truly integrated operating model. And there were a number of pieces of analysis to support that recommendation that were provided in the report. But what this really consists of is sort of four foundational pillars that are required within that. First pillar being strengthening governments and increasing the effectiveness of the Board of Police Commissioners. There were clear recommendations provided on how to strengthen the governance model and clarify roles and drive greater accountability to the communities being served to enable that community-centric ecosystem that we articulated earlier. connecting leadership and strategy across the policing model. So really integrating how the two services develop strategy and think about working together towards a shared outcome or shared community vision and shared outcomes. Transforming from that dual policing model to an integrated services model. And this is, as Bronwyn spoke to, really about introducing coordinated operations, adopting shared standards and functional centers of excellence to drive a common approach and a common citizen experience within HRM. And lastly, creating some community capacity to focus police on core policing functions and investing in a community safety function to provide that ability to respond to and provide services to community members that don't rely on police. Those four elements are critical and foundational parts of that integrated operating model that was recommended. And I'm happy to take questions if there are any on specific elements of that as we move forward. If you wouldn't mind, please moving to the next slide.
If you're able to take questions through the chair, I would like to ask a question before you move.
Please, I will, unless the chair would prefer to hold questions, I'm happy to take questions throughout.
Yeah, thank you. If you're happy to take questions, we can. That might slow the presentation down. I'm a little concerned with us completing the full presentation in the half an hour roughly that we have, because then we would have questions and such. We have other business to do. So maybe I can ask, what's the will of the other commissioners, if I could? I've lost you all here. My thoughts are we ask our questions at the end, but between Bill and this.
That's fine with me. I can write down my questions and ask at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Harry, what did you say?
I was going to say, I think that makes sense. And, it's more in keeping with the 5 minutes, 3 minutes, to.
Okay, thank you. Carry on then.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The road to an integrated operating model in HRM is obviously complex. Some of the recommendations that we put forward in the report are not fully within the control of HRM or the Board of Police Commissioners and require action and collaboration from other key stakeholders, including the Nova Scotia Department of Justice and Public Safety Canada. However, there are a number of actions that HRM can take to improve the quality, efficiency, and responsiveness of their policing model and improve public safety outcomes, regardless of some of those recommendations that are outside their control. So some of those include taking immediate action to strengthen and improve the effectiveness of the Board of Police Commissioners, formalizing some of those permanent joint leadership and functional management teams that were recommended within the report, continuing down the path of creating that community safety function to support those community-led services and community response teams, implementing integrated and coordinated operations between HRP and RCMP where possible, and taking action towards shared standard operating procedures and protocols to improve that interoperability and consistency, moving towards shared deployment planning and resource coordination, and some more tactical options in terms of examining the current jurisdictional boundaries between HRP and RCMP to identify opportunities for more effective deployment of policing resources. So while there are complexities and there are certainly inputs and actions that are required from other parties, we would urge this board and HRM more broadly to continue to move forward and to implement the recommendations as they can, without relying solely on if you can't get the legislative changes that may or may not be required completed. There are options to take to move forward regardless, and we would urge you to do that. I think the last message that I would give is HRM and this group has done a good job of working through things recently. This report represents a snapshot in time, and there have certainly been changes since it was written, including the release of Mass Casualty Commission report and findings. And so I would just like to provide that context as you think about and consider the recommendations provided today. I think that brings us to the end, and I'll let Bill talk through, I think, the council motion that followed our presentation to council.
Perhaps
Great,
this
thank
would
you,
be a good time. Sorry, Bill. I think this would be a good time for anyone to ask their questions specifically to the presentation that Josh put forward. While it's relevant here. Yemi, do you want to start? Commissioner Akindoju?
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just struggling with my technology there, so the speaker was off. Well, Josh, thank you, and thank you for PwC. Fantastic presentation. I have a couple of questions, just form of clarity. You categorically stated integrated policing model does not exist. That the statement given prior is inaccurate. My question therefore is, how would you have defined integrated police modeling? Where, state or country, would you describe that kind of integration exists? Now, I'm asking this question because I did not hear from your presentation that both police model, that is HRP and the RCMP, have the same training or perform their duties in the same way. Do they have similar strategy of operation, and do they have similar training? If they do not, do they complement each other? I didn't hear that, or it wasn't clear enough to me.
Sure. I think there are, thank you, I appreciate the question, Commissioner. I think there are a few things in there that I'm happy to speak to here. So we did outline a number of characteristics that we would expect to see in a highly integrated service model. And it is, I think your point is a good one. There is no policing model that is identical to HRMs today. Having said that, there are other examples of integrated services models within Canada and globally that we were able to identify within the jurisdictional scan. And they have various degrees of these characteristics, which I'll talk about now. So you can have an integrated model without every single one of these characteristics present, but you do need to have a significant degree of integration to be considered within as an integrated policing model. So what we looked at in those characteristics that we used to evaluate that were consistent accountability and governance structures, shared strategy, priorities and outcome, formalized and integrated leadership structures, coordinated day-to-day and specialist services operations with a high degree of interoperability, common policies, standard operating procedures and practices, shared or joint training programs with shared curriculums, joint information records and communication systems, and common executive level functions such as professional standards bureaus as an example. And so it is worth noting there are some pieces that are farther along, joint information records and communication systems. As a good example, HRM has invested in those previously. And so that is a characteristic of integration that does exist. But the remaining characteristics you could only find limited or no evidence of within the current policing model today. Your question around training, and forgive me if there was another question previous to that. Your question around training is a good one. And I think the answer to that is there are different training programs. Core policing responsibilities revolve around similar functions. And so there is similar functional training and curriculums that are available. The standards of those trainings do vary. How they are delivered does vary. and they are not trained to deliver services and provide services in identical ways. So there are differences in how they are trained, and that flows through to the operations and the services that they provide.
So just to make it easier for me to understand, the word complementary, the word coordination, and the word integration, do you see any of these three words differently?
Yes, I do see them quite differently.
Which one would you consider is similar? Coordination or integration as compared to complementary?
Complementary, I think, speaks to how they support and enable each other. So, yeah, are they supportive of each other, or are they contradictory to each other? And there probably are degrees and aspects of the current policing model that are complementary between RCMP and HRP. Coordination I see as one element of integration. So integration is really about, when we say the word integration, what we're really talking about is, are you operating as one? And so that has implications at a governance level, that has implications at a leadership level and in operations. But really what ultimately I think this is driving towards is, what is that citizen experience? If you have different services and different standards and different ways of operating, the citizen experiences different things when they call for service. And community members and those partnerships that I think both HRP and RCMP are trying to build today have to be built differently. And so inherently that lack of integration inhibits some of those other really good things that both HRP and RCMP and HRM are trying to build. So I see they're similar in spirit, I think, the words that you just highlighted, complementary, coordinated, and integrated, but I do see them as quite different.
Thank you.
Commissioner Critchley? And Commissioner Blackburn, you had your hand up. Can you just confirm whether or not it was earlier? I just wanted to finalize the speaking list.
Yes, I do. I put my request in the chat instead. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner Critchley.
Okay, thank you, Chair Smith, and thank you, Josh, for the presentation. Obviously, read the report, watched the presentation in council. So I just have a number of questions for you, if it's okay. I can ask you all the questions at once, or I could ask you one at a time. What would your preference be?
I guess not knowing the number of questions you have,
okay.
I might prefer one at a time, if that's okay.
Sure. So page 42 of the report, you're talking, this is in the strengthening governance section. You talk about the potential use of service level agreements. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that. I'm not really sure, because you talk about agreements between the community and policing services. So I'm just not, wondered if you could explain a little more detail about that.
Sure, yeah, and I think I'll start maybe with what service level agreements are. So defining that expectation for service provision with two-way accountability. And so, sorry, bear with me, I'm trying to find the exact page here. Within that, what you're trying to build is that two-way accountability. So you want your service provision to community members to be based on their needs, and citizens should have an expectation of what that looks like, including how services are provided and things like timeliness and those sorts of things, which are already considered. And I think within the context of this particular document, what we're really trying to define is that clear accountability structure. So that is one mechanism that can be used to drive that joint accountability and that bilateral accountability to community members.
Okay. Can you say a little bit more? So page 46 of the report, you're talking about kind of key elements of commission composition. And the first one deals with independence. And the second sentence of that section reads, the board should continue advocating for reducing the number of representatives from HRM Council. Can you explain that and just provide some more clarification about that?
Sure. One common consideration within governance models as it relates to policing services is providing a degree of independence from political influence. And so the risk of that obviously is that political influence impacts how operational decisions are made. And so obviously there needs to be some degree of accountability to elected officials. That's essential. It's part of the democratic world that we live in. But it is becoming more and more common practice and considered good practice to not involve directly elected officials within the governance and oversight models for policing services to avoid the perception of or the actual influence of political decision making on operations.
Okay. Can you say, okay, so on page 63 of the report, this is the section dealing with sort of policing alternatives. You say the second paragraph on the page, based on preliminary high-level analysis, 20% of calls in HRM can be classified as low risk, low urgency, or mental health, wellness, or general assistance. Can you give me a sense of what does preliminary high-level analysis mean? And how did you arrive at that figure?
Sure. So we did request actual call data from both the RCMP and HRP. And so we did look at their classifications of that data without getting into the specifics of call types. That analysis is just what it says, a preliminary categorization based on our understanding of that data and the definitions of those different classifications as provided by the HRP and RCMP. It is preliminary, and one of the things that we validated that against is other jurisdictions who have undertaken to implement community response models or alternative response models, and what those proportions of police services who have undertaken that, if they align. So there was a couple different elements there. One is the actual call data. Two is benchmarking to validate whether this is a reasonable range. And both of those inputs were used to put forward this preliminary analysis. It by no means is a specific recommendation or an exact representation of what those calls are. It is a preliminary view that I think highlights the potential and probability for some of those calls to be responded to using alternative models as we've recommended.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, Harry's time's almost up. Do you want to ask one more question before it's fully lapsed and then?
No, that's all right, Chair. I'll come back. That's all right.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Blackburn?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just have two questions. And one of them actually follows up on what Commissioner Critchley was asking about. My first question, though, is would you anticipate that much or if any of this report would change now that the MCC report has dropped? I know that this report was released within days, I think, of the Mass Casualty Commission report being released, and just wondering if you would anticipate any major changes to this report based on what you learned from the MCC report. And the second question is just to follow up on what Commissioner Critchley was asking about. Do you recommend that councillors not sit on the Board of Police Commission? Is that something that that perhaps needs to be considered or has been considered and done in other jurisdictions? Thank you.
Yes, two excellent questions. I think with regards to the Mass Casualty Commission, obviously at the time that we were conducting this study, that was underway. And so we were aware of it, didn't obviously know what the findings would be or those recommendations, but we did try to approach the analysis in a way that would stand up after the report was released and those recommendations were released. So I'm not sure I'm not sure if there would have been major changes to the work that we did. I think we tried to approach it as comprehensively and with our eyes open with regards to that Mass Casualty Commission, following along with the proceedings, I think appropriately. Without having thought about this in too much depth, obviously, I don't think that our recommendations or the analysis or our approach to the analysis would have changed significantly. There may be some new, please.
Yeah, if I can just add to that. So we've had some follow-up conversations about the MCC in the context of the report that we've written. I think if anything, sort of walking away and as someone who lives in the province, certainly, it really for us just impresses, I think, the importance and heightened urgency behind taking action. So I think in the report, we really tried to convey, that an ultimate end goal for the city may be an integrated model, but that in the interim, there is significant work that can start soon. And I think that was also some of what we saw in the MCC around the importance of taking some action. And obviously the recommendations in the MCC are extensive and will require significant work and resource to implement. But I think for us, as observers on the MCC front, we really just saw the increased urgency behind taking action. I think there was a second question, Josh, related to governance and councillors.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bronwyn. Yes, with regards to the presence of council members on the Board of Police Commissioners, I do think that is something that should be considered. And there are different ways you can go about that in terms of adjusting, for example, the roles of council members who may sit on commission. I think if there are alternative mechanisms to ensure that separation and that protection against perceived or actual influence of political level decision making on operations, that's really the risk that you're mitigating against. That independence and not having a presence of council members on the Board of Police Commissioners is one possible mechanism to protect against that. There are others that can be considered, and I will defer to the folks within HRM and the Board of Police Commissioners to determine what the appropriate mechanism for that might be.
Do you know of other jurisdictions where perhaps councillors would sit sort of ex officio on a Board of Police Commissioners just to sort of give guidance from a council perspective, but not have a voting role?
Yes, that is a common model that's used in a number of jurisdictions within municipal policing services specifically, and I think there is a similar version of that at a provincial level for some of those provinces who have contracted policing from the RCMP in the same way. So it's one, yeah, it is one common method for involving council within the Board of Police Commissioners. Not the only one, but.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before I go to you, Harry, I have a question from one of our members who was not able to ask. And I'll just start with a reference to bylaw 100. The Board of Police Commissioners in Halifax sorry, that's my timer for Lisa, are constrained by that legislation related to that. And in fact, are all volunteers. There's no compensation for any of the councillors or the resident commissioners. So just the question related to that is, how would you propose to achieve the kind of engagement that is really on about 10 pages in this report, having busy councillors and community volunteers with day jobs? So one consideration that's been talked about within our debates at times are around the potential payment or some kind of stipend or honorarium or something of that nature. And I know other committees are doing it. So wondering if you could comment on capacity of this board in relation to the kind of presentation that's been put forward in this for recommendations in this report.
Yes, yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think there are a couple elements here that I'd like to touch on. In terms of compensation, I do believe that we do have a recommendation within the report to consider compensation for our Board of Police Commissioner members. Their responsibility is great, and in reflection of the recommendations that we've made in terms of strengthening their role and their responsibilities to enable this integrated policing model that's been recommended, that compensation, I think, can help to ensure that there's enough time for preparation and compensate members for the effort that is required and the expertise that is required to provide proper governance. I do also just want to reflect on the composition of the Board of Police Commissioners is something that we also touched on within that report. And so when we talk about things like representation from council members or compensation, we should also be talking about what is the competency and representation and skill set of that Board of Police Commissioners in fulfilling their duties. And so having a broad representation, both professionally and in background experience, and also reflective of the community members within HRM is just as important. So there are a number of things that should be considered in the future. Compensation, certainly one of them. Increasing the capacity, and I think the Board of Police Commissioners has already done so with the hiring of a support staff. So increasing capacity is certainly one. With greater responsibility, you need the time and capacity to fulfill those responsibilities.
Thank you. And I'll just add, I'll leave mine for after. Harry, do you want to go? Commissioner Critchley?
Yeah, but I see Commissioner Akintosh's got his hand up. If he wants to go ahead of me, he's welcome to.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. I just wanted to highlight some of the wordings used here in terms of composition of the board or members of the board. I think Josh had used the word operational, and I think by the code of conduct or by the act itself, neither non-council members or council members have a right as police board members to adjudicate on operational matters concerning the police. So you have used the word operational. Maybe that should be changed as well.
Yeah, I'm without seeing the specific context of where that word is used, that is bringing this comment. I think that's fair. I think having operational experience and operational knowledge is helpful at the board level to be able to understand how that oversight and how those accountability measures translate to operational decisions is helpful. But making operational decisions in terms of how resources are deployed or where resources are deployed, what resources are deployed, for example, falls outside of the Board of Police Commissioners role. So I think if operational is used in that context within the report, certainly could and should be changed.
Okay. I just wanted to refer to the fact that the board deals in terms of governance and policy and not on operational matters. And to that extent, the issue of board composition regarding council members or non-council members, from my own perspective, is totally irrelevant. Leadership can be different, but if council members can adjudicate on the whole HRM as a policy, I do not see any reason why they cannot be members of the police commission if they do not deal with matters pertaining to operations of the police. I just want to be very clear about governance and policy. If their roles and I'm not speaking for council members here, as council members is governance and policy and management of the whole HRM, having to manage to be a member of a subsidiary or arm of that same council, needs to, I think, makes sense. We can talk about leadership. It's a different thing.
Thank you, Commissioner Akindoju. What I think I'm going to ask for you is to put a pin in that one and consider bringing that back to the table when as things go forward with the planning and structure of assuming that we pass a motion today that reinforces the engagement with the CAO on delivering on the recommendation that council has asked. So just make a note for us or put that in that wonderfully gifted brain of yours to bring back later. Thank you. Harry?
Thank you, Chair. I just have two more questions. First, Josh, I wonder, obviously you did a significant amount of consultation, both within municipal government, provincial government, and then the community. So my first question is, what to your mind, you took pains and you were very direct in saying that, there is a widely held view within the HRM that there is an integrated model. And you were very clear that that's not the case, or many of the hallmarks of integration that you identified are not in place. So my first question is, what accounts in your mind, if you don't mind speculating, for that kind of gap or the gulf between this widely held view, as you put it, and what is actually the case? So that's question number one. Question number two is, you talk a lot about the harmonizing policies and standard operating procedures as well as training. Obviously, those are all things that are within the board's purview. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about what you see the board's role there being. I know you kind of talk about those things in different sections. It's not something that gets touched on in that section on strengthening governance. So I'm wondering if you could speak about that in a little more detail.
Sure. Sorry, can you, I was thinking about your second question there. Can you remind me what your first question was?
So you described there, you said that there is a widely held view within the HRM.
Right. Yes.
That there is an integrated model. And you said the finding of this report is that is not the case. So I'm asking you, in your estimation, based on all the consultation that you did, what accounts for that gap?
I think, yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think the answer lies in what the public can see versus what they can't see. And so I think that the kind of visible parts of the policing model, the closeness of the operations in terms of, geographical boundaries, for example, and jurisdictional boundaries, for example, even the role and how the two police services report to this body kind of lends itself to that perception of integration. And so I think that belief is more about what is seen publicly versus how things actually operate at the organizational level within and between the two police services. So citizens don't have that view. I think even council members were surprised by some of the findings when we presented to council, and I think it really is about kind of what is visible to the citizens versus what is in place operationally when you take a deeper dive into how things work. So I think that's maybe part of the answer to that first question. In terms of
Harry, just to clarify, sorry, were you does that answer your question, or were you asking more whether a single thing could be attributed to the lack of integration?
No, I was wondering really more about perceptions, right? Because if you have a certain perception and that perception isn't the same as what is actually the case, then there's got to be something that is accounting for that. And I appreciate Josh answering the question kind of with respect to members of the public. I mean, you kind of then went on to say, and many councillors feel the same way too. But you know, we're here as the board, right? We're not here as members of the public. So, you know, if there's anything more specific you could say in relation to our role as the board, then you're welcome to, but I think you did answer my question and I appreciate it.
Was there more you wanted to add, Bronwyn, or?
No.
Okay. With regards to training and developing standard operating procedures and things like that, I think, as has been mentioned, the role of the board is to develop policy and to set those strategic priorities and the outcomes that are expected. And so I think at that governance level, that remains the same. Those things flow down into things like standard operating procedures and ensuring those standard operating procedures are in line with policy and the strategic direction and oversight set by this body. And so that would be, I guess, where the role of the board is, certainly not in developing, you know, training curriculums, but ensuring that those training curriculums meet the intended objectives and expectations of this board within the purview of policy and oversight.
Okay, thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other questions? I have a couple from my desk, but I want to make sure commissioners are good. So I'll move forward with mine. I just wonder, in your projected costs for future model of policing, you highlight human resources, equipment, real estate, admin, and other costs. Would it be safe to assume that from within that administration, and I looked further where you kind of clarified on page 91, and I see no reference to the administration being within or a cost element around resourcing the board. We have noted, we have done some work here at the with the collaboration of the municipality to add in staff and some expert opinion opportunities within legal situations that we have, but there's, you know, in all of the reports that have come out, including this one, is a statement of improved governance, stronger governance, and one of the things that we've identified here at this board is the capacity that we have to have the staff, and then we have Josh, but I could envision admin staff that are dedicated specifically to the board, for instance. Clerk's office are tremendously good with us, but there's a lot of work to be done that might require more resourcing, but I don't see it here. Is that something that is missed or and that we should have to bring forward, or am I missing something in this report?
I will have to, for sake of transparency, refer back to our own calculations to determine what we allocated for board compensation. In terms of the details about support for the Board of Police Commissioners, we do talk about what that may look like within the narrative of the report, and certainly that depends on the amount of support and the type of support that is provided. The majority of the cost calculations were developed around the actual policing model itself, and so there was less detail with regards to projecting or estimating future costs at the governance level. I do believe that we built in to the cost model compensation for the Board of Police Commissioners and some degree of cost for support, but I'll need to validate that. I can't recall the exact details from memory here. My apologies.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's it for me. I'll give a last call for any further questions, then we'll move to Bill Moore to present on the recommendations from council and from as the Director of Public Safety. Okay, Bill, let's move this now to you.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take a moment in front of the board to thank PwC, Bronwyn, and Josh. there was some very difficult conversations during that year, and it's that their professionalism and the way that they approached it was very well respected from my perspective, and really pleased to have worked with them. If I could have the slides back up, please. Then we can go to, I think it's right after the PwC reports. No, the next one. Next, go forward. I think if we went backwards there. After the slide after questions, please. Okay, recommendations. Here we go. So for the members of the board, after the presentation, the following recommendation report was put forward. I'm sorry, recommendation request was put forward to the board, and was the first three were subsequently passed, and the number 4 was added on as an additional motion. So the first was refer the policing transformation study to the Board of Police Commissioners for the review, which we're doing today. The second was to direct the Chief Administrative Officer to meet with the Board of Police Commissioners and report to Council on the results of the review of the Board of Study. And number 3, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to meet with representatives of the province of Nova Scotia and request HRM be a participant in the multi-sectoral council being developed by the province. The multi-sectoral council is a reference coming from the Mass Casualty Commission, and that was a recommendation to look at policing because of the significant number of RCMP as it relates to the provincial policing model. We felt it would be important that HRM have a seat at that table, especially in light of the work that's being done in relation to this transformation. And then the 4th recommendation was direct the Chief Administrative Officer to report back to Council in 18 months regarding the viability of achieving an integrated policing model with recommendations for next steps. So those were the recommendations approved by Council, and with that, we're now basically presenting this information to the board to begin the process with the board.
Thank you, Bill. Any clarification questions there for Bill or for, and Harry, you have one left for Josh or Bronwyn.
No, thanks, Becky. I don't have any questions for Josh and Bronwyn. I do have questions for Bill, if that's all right, but I'm happy to defer to others. If
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Bill, I wondered if you could tell, obviously this wasn't passed very long ago, but what is the status of recommendations, or sorry, what is the status of recommendation 3 in relation to the multi-sectoral council?
Do you want me to take that, CAO? Did you want to speak to that one?
I can speak to that one. So Bill and I have met with the Department of Justice on that, and they have confirmed that we will be a participating member on the multi-sectoral council. Additionally, they have added me to the management committee for the RCMP contract provincially.
Okay, and has that council started to meet, or?
No, we have not received any invitations to any meeting yet, so I'm assuming that means they're not meeting. But Bill, we should follow up with that in writing to find out when that will commence.
Hey, seeing
Oh,
no
you want to
more-
ask another? Sorry, I thought Bill was going to maybe say something. I just have one more question. Bill, like obviously recommendation 4 was added by council, and you know, the word that they used there was viability, right? So, but this, I just want to get a sense from you and perhaps the CAO. The 18-month timeline isn't to go away and produce an implementation plan for implementing the PwC recommendations. It's simply to determine whether or not the recommendations are even viable. Is that correct?
Hard for me.
Yes, to some
Okay.
extent it is, but that being said, one of the things we had conveyed when we were at council, if you had watched that dialogue, was that there's what we perceive to be low-hanging fruit that we're going to be working on, more collaboration, integration between HRP and RCMP regardless. The fourth recommendation, that you're picking up on or focusing on, there was a fair amount of discussion at that one around council because there was some skepticism around our ability to truly move towards an integrated model, and they wanted a point at which a decision would be made, because we don't want to waste time banging our head against a brick wall, as it were, if we're not going to be able to get anywhere with it.
Right. Okay. I mean, so just one more point of clarification then, if that's all right. So that's very helpful for me to understand, because that's not clear from this motion from council. That effectively what you're saying is that some parts of this are at the viability stage, the research stage. Some parts of it are going to be implemented. Like nothing in this motion says the council endorsed the recommendations of the PwC report. So it's I think useful for the board. Obviously there's recommendations that are within the board's purview, but it's hard for us to know sort of what are those things that have been identified as low-hanging fruit, and what, if any of them, are within the board's jurisdiction. So that, because of course, recommendation 1 is that the board review this report and then presumably act on the basis of that review.
So council is looking for feedback from the board on this report at some point in time. And in terms of what's actionable, I would say it's the recommendations that align with recommendations coming out of other studies, such as, for instance, the Mass Casualty Commission report. So one of the helpful things that Josh has been doing is now cross-referencing, this came from the Wortley report, this came from the Mass Casualty Commission report, this came from the policing study, and finding the ones that intersect.
So through you, Chair.
Go ahead, Commissioner
Thank you
Akindoju.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would assume that this meeting is for us to receive the presentation. The recommendation needs to be dealt with at a separate meeting. As part of this presentation is a recommendation, because there's so many issues or more details that will need to be dealt with in terms of what Councillor has recommended the board to do. For example, I'll give you legislative powers. What powers do we have? I had asked questions in terms of integration, coordination, and complementary in terms of strategy, operations. There's so many things here that we need to consider in terms of the recommendation and what powers the board has in dealing with the coming up with a resolution or deliberating further on this or not. And like the CEO said, there are other materials that will be needed in recommending or responding back to the council on this issue. I would suggest that at this meeting, we will take questions. We've taken questions from PwC, we've listened, we will get back on the recommendation. I think that's what we will need to sort of deliberate in details on the recommendation at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to add something from the chair. So we do have a motion that we were looking at having deliberated today, which is essentially around creating a motion that directs our chiefs to engage with the CAO around the creation of that report. That is around their operational pieces of integration, and I think that we have to, in my opinion, we should consider that sooner than later. The other piece, I think that what you're referencing, Commissioner Akindoju and potentially Commissioner Critchley, is the engagement that would go on as well with the board in the full on, is this motion that might come forward. In fact, I'm going to suggest that we put that on right away, is for by the year end, but there's another whole year of work to be done where we as a board would be further engaged on some of that low hanging fruit and the role and the structure and the strengthening of board governance as set out in this transformation study, but also in the mass casualty and a number of things. So today's, I think with that, I'm going to suggest that we ask Commissioner Blackburn to put a motion on the floor so we can debate that piece now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that the Board of Police Commissioners, 1, direct the Chief of the Halifax Regional Police and advise the officer in charge of the RCMP to work with the Community Safety Office to prepare staff report by the end of 2023, outlining the necessary steps to achieve an integrated operating model and to inform the CAO's report to Regional Council. And 2, direct the Chief of Halifax Regional Police and advise the officer in charge of the RCMP to provide verbal updates during each regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Police Commission. I so move.
Is there a seconder?
I do second that.
Councillor Akindoju. Okay, so at this point, we will now create a speaking list for anyone who has an interest in this motion to ask questions on that. Seeing and hearing none, is there a call for the question?
Sorry, no, I was just trying to be polite and not always be the first to ask questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Critchley.
Sorry, I don't feel like I fully understand what this motion means. I've heard from the CAO that there are parts of the report that are at basically the study stage. Like some recommendations, they have to determine whether they're even viable. Other recommendations and in relation to integration have been accepted, I guess, and we're moving forward on them, but I don't know which are which and what we're directing them to, like what aspects of it we're asking them to look at doing right now. I see the CAO's hands up. I've got another point, if that's okay, but I'll let the CAO maybe clarify.
CAO, please.
Thanks. So basically, we want to get some direction so we can get some momentum going. Right now, there is no formally established working group. There are not people meeting to sit down and work through any of the recommendations in this report that I'm aware of. Bill Moore, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we established a working group on this yet?
No, not as yet. This was because of the motion going to council, we want to bring it to the board. And I think that's my sense is that's what this motion is doing, is to provide some momentum to allow for a working group to start working through what is low-hanging fruit, what is not going to be moved forward, and then be able to report back to the board. Because as correctly stated, the strategic direction of how these things move forward is in the purview of the board. So I think it would be, I suspect it would be more of an iterative process of coming back to say, look, this is how we started to categorize some of these pieces, and up to the police services to provide either information or ask for direction as on an integrated, on a direction on one or more of the different issues. It's kind of a chicken and the egg. We need to have the board's approval, but we could sit and go through every one of them before anything gets moving. So,
all right, I appreciate that. I guess so. My concern with this is that the overarching recommendation from the policing transformation study, as it relates to the board, is really twofold. One is that the board needs to be the single governance structure for the police in the HRM, and 2 is that the board needs to be strengthened and, in the words of the study, reimagined. I don't see this motion as aligning with the spirit of that recommendation, in that the board is here contemplated in this motion as just sort of passively receiving information. I think it's a great idea to create a working group with participation from HRP, RCMP, HRM, and public safety. However, I think the board shouldn't just sort of be a passive recipient of information from that working group, I actually think there should be board representation on that working group, because it's in keeping with the spirit of the recommendation that the board be strengthened, that the board play a role in whatever this is in looking at these recommendations. So I'm going to propose an amendment, and I mean, I'll say what the amendment is, and then Commissioner Blackburn can let me know whether it's a friendly amendment. But I'm going to.
Sorry, before you propose your amendment, can we still deliberate on this before you change it?
I mean, I look to the chair or the clerk. I interfer.
I'd just like to clarify, I think, something.
Sure.
Yeah, before further. So, as I stated before we started this is our direction to our chiefs to engage. This is our direction. This is our public record that says our expectation of them is to engage on this. I'm not sure if by the end of 2023 is achievable, and Bill can speak to that because it's his report that he might be creating, and I don't think we have that right. And that the piece around the working group, Commissioner Critchley, is that is in what I referenced earlier, is that will come in time as further consideration of that working group, and really that's the key to that. So this specifically is operationally, because we don't engage, we do not govern operations. Our chiefs know what they have capacity to integrate on within operations. That is their job, and we are asking them to put attention to it. That's how I see this motion, and so I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to suggest that Commissioner Critchley, we offer Commissioner Akindoju the opportunity to further this. I think he feels that there's something to add here before you put a motion of change on the floor. That's really semantics. It's between the two of you what you can want.
No, that's fine by me. That's why I was trying to wait and see if others wanted to speak first before, we were going to go right to a vote, right? I was waiting to see if others
on that, yes, on that one. But you chimed in, so that stayed that. Commissioner Akindoju.
Thank you very, very much, my chair. I think this motion has done justice to recommendation 4. We've spoken of the fact over several times that we have so many assignments, we never get to it. I would first of all agree that within that 18 months, we should get back to council with a recommendation. To enable us to do that effectively, we have simply asking by this motion to go back to the operators, both the LCRMP and the HRP, to tell us exactly what is working, what is not working, and how they can build capacity in terms of integration. We have enough materials. The council has spent money, paid money to PwC. Both the state and federal has paid a lot of money with the public mass whatever report. We have so many materials to put together. We are only asking for one more thing to close this up. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things I will pick up from the suggestion that Harry made is to have a member of this police commission in this committee. That is what I'm going to agree to, but this motion is perfect. It's one of the things we need to make sure that recommendation 4 takes place. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Critchley? Oh, I actually had Marty Ward, our legal advisor, would like to speak.
Thank you. I wanted to just note that an amendment can be made at any time here. So if the proper procedure would be if Harry is going to continue with his proposal for an amendment, the amendment should be made, the debate should be on the amendment should be dealt with, and then we should return to the main motion.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Critchley.
All right. Well, I mean, I appreciate where we're all at. I understand this is a preliminary thing, but again, I think again, I don't like having these debates about what's
Can you,
called.
can you put your amendment on the floor first?
Sure,
before
yeah.
you-
So I'm going to amend the motion such that in number 1, it would read, direct the chief and advise the officer in charge to work with the community safety office as part of a committee, comma, with a single board representative, end comma, and then to prepare a staff report.
So,
With one, maybe perhaps with between 1 and 3 board representatives, because it can't be more than 3.
and are you asking to take out the part around outlining necessary steps to achieve the integrated operating model, or is that staying? It's just a change.
I'm just adding those words, so it's otherwise staying the same. I can write it out if it's helpful.
Ian or Andrea, do you have a sense of that? And maybe we can see it in writing.
So what I have is that after community safety office, there would be a comma, and then you had and to work with 2 to 3 members of the board as part of a committee.
1 to 3.
1 to 3.
Yeah.
And then comma. Was that correct, Harry?
I'm just going to write it out.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Commissioner Blackburn, do you see this as a friendly amendment? And your seconder would have to agree?
Direct the chief. Sorry, just a second. I'm just writing what Harry wrote down. Officer in charge to work part of the committee. All right. Yeah, that's a friendly amendment as far as I'm concerned. That's good.
Stand by you.
Fine by you as well, Commissioner?
Yeah.
I stand by that.
Okay. Does anyone want to speak to that? Not seeing anyone, I will add my piece. I think that this is certainly an amendment that is relevant here, and it's just specifically outlining that there's an expectation that the board would want to have representation on the committee, and that's a good thing, and it's also a strong statement to council. So I'm in favor of that as well. Okay. Seeing no further questions to my knowledge, should we call the further question?
Question.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Commissioner Akindoju, I didn't hear yours.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. All those against, nay. And the motion is carried. Okay, so before we close this off, I think a question for you, Kathy, would be, and Bill, perhaps from the chair's role or just as a commissioner, that what kind of expectation timelines do you have to forming that committee and striking this? How soon can this get to council? And do you need council direction before you can start to create that momentum with a committee of a working group?
We need to start working on this now because we're into budget and business planning season starting in September. I would say we need to strike our committee and start meeting every, 2 weeks probably. The working group is going to have to put a lot of heavy lifting in between now and the end of the year, I think, to get us where we need to be. And I do not necessarily think we need to go back to council, but we'll now have to have a discussion about how is the Board of Police Commissioners going to select the member to sit on the working group?
Well, we could, we're past our timeline for what we were hoping to achieve here within a half an hour. I think we could do some of this, perhaps Ian or Andrea, you can suggest that we could do something through emails on this. Does this specifically have to be done in a meeting? And if not, we could do this offline.
I believe perhaps you could have some of the discussions offline in terms of gauging interest. But
Yes,
if you're going to formally appoint those members to a committee, I would say that would have to be by vote.
yeah,
If those conversations could happen prior to the meeting on Wednesday, we could include it as an added item on the agenda for Wednesday.
okay. All right, I'm going to suggest we do that. If it turns out that we have the capacity at the end of this meeting, if if the stars align and we get through our other two items and there's still a little time, maybe we could have a short discussion around expressions of interest, but in the interest of moving forward in the agenda, let's plan to do it offline otherwise. And with the goal of having that for a Wednesday ratification. Sound good? All right. So thank you to Josh and Bronwyn and Bill as well for the work that you folks have been doing on this. Important. And Josh as well, our Josh, for continued engagement in that as well. So, all right, folks, thank you very much. We are going to need a motion to adjourn, move to in camera. And we can have that.
I move that we go in camera.
Okay, is there a seconder? Commissioner Critchley seconds. Thank you very much, folks. And we will be moving to a Teams meeting, so look for that in your calendars.
So I will remind everyone that the calendar appointment for the in-camera meeting has the Teams link. And if you could please leave the Zoom meeting before you join that Teams meeting. And then when the Teams meeting is completed, you will need to rejoin the Zoom meeting in order for any ratification votes and to adjourn the meeting.
Okay,
So thank you.
thanks,
Can
Ann and
Can
Jeff. Go
can
ahead,
you hear me?
Marty. Yeah.
I just remind people, Chair, about not everybody will be in the in-camera session.
Yeah, I did that earlier. So Chiefs, Christie and Kinsella, we will not have you in those two meetings, but and these are the only two. So, don't feel like you have to stay and come back to wrap up our meeting.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, take care.
As well, Bill Moore can also leave as well, Chair.
Commissioner, Chief Christie.
Is that your desire, Chair, that we're released? I don't mind
Yeah.
being here to come back. Or
No, you might as, there's nothing else after this. So
Okay.
don't hang up
Thank
for
you.
us. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hi, Vice Chair Critchley. I see that you're returning from in camera. We just momentarily, I believe we have quorum. Let me just double check. Just one moment.
Need one more.
Yeah, we need one more. I can see that you're returning from in camera.
Oh, you have Yemi's there now.
Okay. And we have Commissioner Thomas as well. So we have quorum, Vice Chair.
Thank you so much. And I understand there's to be a ratification motion. Is that to put in the chat or?
That is correct. I will just copy the first one for 5.1 right now.
All right, thank you so much. If I could have a mover for the ratification motion for 5.1, please.
I can do that for you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Sure, thank you.
Alrighty, I move that the Board of Police Commissioners adopt the direction provided in camera in private. I so move.
Thank you. And can I get a seconder, please? I see Commissioner. Is there, unless there's any debate on the motion, just we could call the question on the motion.
Question?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. Now the second ratification motion, if I could have a mover, please. Commissioner Blackburn, you did a great job the first time. You got that radio voice.
All right. One more time. I move that the Board of Police Commissioners, 1, adopt the direction provided in camera in private, and 2, direct that the private and confidential handouts dated July 5th, 2023 and July 3rd, 2023 be maintained as private and confidential. I so move.
Thank you, Commissioner Blackburn. Looking for a seconder, please.
I second.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Akindoju. Unless there's any debate, I'll call a question on that motion, please. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. There being none, the motion passes. And now a motion to adjourn, please. Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Thank